So I'll ask our audience now to please come back. We've had a beautiful comfort break. I'm hearing about all this delicious food and I'm really hungry. So stop talking about food, or at least somebody get me some food too. It's really good to hear that you're all enjoying some lunch. Feel free to continue to do so as we move through. Oh, iced coffee, Emma. I'm going to have to, all right. So yes, please feel free to continue enjoying that delicious food and iced coffee and all the other delicious goodies that you have. I'll introduce first of all, Emma Luke, who will tell us a little bit about a story about how the Earth Observation for Climate Smart Innovation project came to be. We'll then hand over to Donna Lawler from Azimuth Advisory, who will speak to us about many interesting things revolving around IP as well, and I guess the legal side of the work that you do when you come up with an idea and how to protect yourself. And then we'll throw over to Daniel O'Toole, who's here from Austrade, who works in the space part of Austrade. So he'll be able to give you insights around how Austrade and other similar organisations can help you to push your idea forward and bring it into reality. So, Emma, I'll happily pass over to you while I sit here dreaming of Vietnamese coffee.
Oh, I'm really sorry about that, Roshni, but yes, after all the talk about the different wonderful types of cuisine yesterday coming from Southeast Asia, I just realised I had to go out and get myself some banh mi. So hello and thank you everyone for another great day and the opportunity to speak again. I wanted to, we're getting quite familiar and quite comfortable with each other now, and so I wanted to tell you a story, and this story is about how this project idea, Earth Observation for Climate Smart Innovation, actually came to be this event this week. Of course, there are many people involved in the journey along the way, and it would be very easy for me to accidentally forget someone. So if I do forget to acknowledge an organisation or an individual, please forgive me because I'm just trying to give the quick version of this. So here in Australia, we've developed this wonderful technology known as the Open Data Cube, and we've made it freely and openly available. We've done this in recognition that other parts of the space value chain, including satellite imagery, is made open and freely available by other countries such as the US and the Europeans. And this is the way that Australia has chosen to help contribute and give back to the space community. And as we all know, data is a lot more valuable if it's been corrected and processed and analysed, and it can be more quickly and more readily be turned into information that can support a wide range of users, and the Open Data Cube technology does just that. So that's the first bit of the introduction. So the second thing was we wanted to make sure that we were getting our Open Data Cube technology out to a greater range of users. And we know that those who are directly connect to geospatial technology understand what the purpose of a data cube is and does. But we know for people, even such as myself, I'm a policy person mostly, a little bit of a marine scientist too, can feel a little bit intimidated by all of the tech and the coding, but we're exposed to challenges and changes in our landscape every day that the technology could potentially benefit. So we have the ideas, or as you've heard the term, use cases, for potential application of the Open Data Cube technology. It's just that we don't necessarily know how to use or build a data cube, or am even aware of its existence. So we thought, we, CSIRO, GA and Frontier thought, wouldn't it be great if we ran a hackathon where we could bring a very diverse community together to explore the different ways that we could get the technology working for the end users, and maybe focus a little less on building products first and then looking for users or markets, but actually bring the users and markets, talk about the problems, and then see just whether or not we could use the Open Data Cube to support some applications of benefit. So I think that's sort of the overview of what has brought everyone together in this room today. So it hasn't been a traditional Open Data Cube hackathon in that we get a group of very talented geospatial experts to sit and smash out some code and develop some applications over a 1 week period. And so that's actually okay. It's perhaps more a business style hackathon where you get a first group of very different people coming from different backgrounds and, in our case, different cultures, which is a really rich ground for innovation, because if you come from different perspectives with different insights, that's the most fertile ground for innovation to happen. So that's why through this week, we've given you a lot of the tech sessions on the Open Data Cube used through the EASY platform that CSIRO has developed. But we've also given some training in other aspects of concept development, let's just say, from moving an idea through to a product, some cultural training, because we do believe that there is great opportunity to build Open Data Cube products for Southeast Asia to help them with the very immense challenges and very many varied challenges of a changing climate. We've seen things like flooding, natural disasters, loss of agricultural land because of salt water coming in, trying to ensure quality water with increased pressures of urbanisation. The Data Cube can look at all of these sorts of challenges and can actually help address those. And this community, most of us, the Aussies on the call who are Data Cube people, we all we're not private industry, so we don't have a we're not trying to sell a type of product. We actually want to work with you to understand how this technology can help you. There could be a commercial potential, but it doesn't have to be. So I suppose what I would really love to see through this week is that thing of you might have an individual idea or a thought that goes, maybe we could do this, and through this friendly group, I'm hoping that you can get access to the support and technical advice to help refine that idea and turn it into a concept, which after this week, we, the collective Aussie team, would be happy to potentially continue working with you and to identify the next necessary steps and support and networks that you need to take your idea and move it further along to a viable concept. So we have some time tomorrow, and we have a very friendly panel who are going to, I want to say judge the ideas, but that's not quite right, because they're not going to judge. They're a very supportive group. They would love to hear your ideas pitched, and they're going to offer some suggestions on how to make your idea maybe a bit more attractive to a venture capitalist, or they'll be able to tell you how to improve the science aspects of your idea. So I know it can be really a bit frightening, and I'd be the first to agree, presenting an idea to a group, but hopefully amongst this group, we're all friends now, firm friends. And what we really want to see is every participant walking away from this week knowing that they've learned a few things from this experience. And hopefully, if you've developed an idea, but you've decided you're not going to take it away and work on it some more, just actually going through the process of refining an idea, that will help you as well. Because after all, they say that with innovation, it's 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. So it's very easy to have an idea, but it's actually the next step, which is all that hard work of making it viable, which is so important. So I think that's probably enough from me. I'm seeing a thumbs up, but it's a friendly group and we really just want to get the most out of this experience, and we're learning too. Like, everyone in the project team is learning and coming away with so many valuable insights. So yeah, we've loved delivering this week for you. So that's me, over and out, and I'm going to have my Vietnamese coffee now.
Thank you so much, Emma. I think it helps to understand the essence of how we designed this project and what we want to bring to you, because we're not hoping to necessarily gain anything from you at all in this whole project. What we want to do is do our best to connect people with ideas to others who can help and support them to make those ideas into reality, to do something good for the planet. So thank you very much, Emma. I'll pass over to our first keynote speaker now, Donna Lawler from Azimuth Advisory. Take it away, Donna.
Hi, everyone. Let me just give me a moment and I will share my screen. Okay, are you seeing that?
Not yet. Maybe it's on its way.
Let me just try again.
There we go. We can. Thank you.
Okay. For some reason that opens up millions of windows and now I can't see anything. Okay. Okay, well, I'm from Azimuth Advisory. I am a lawyer, so apologize to everybody who doesn't really want to sit listening to a lawyer, but I won't be too long. My career started as a technology lawyer, and then more than 22 through 23 years ago now, I started working at Optus, which is Australia's second largest telecommunications company, and I found out that they have a satellite fleet. So long story short, I became essentially a space lawyer. So for the last 20 years, I've been working in a very specialized area of technology law, which is space law. And about 3 years ago, I left Optus, and together with the man of my dreams, Professor Stephen Freeland, who's my husband and partner in business as well, we started Azimuth Advisory, which is a law firm specializing in space activities. So we only do space activities. Part of that is Earth observation. Some of our clients are developing hyperspectral spacecraft and sensors and things like that. And sometimes we help clients purchase spatial data, and as well as we also help launch facilities, launch providers, satellite operators, and so on. So quite a wide range of things. But today I'm going to just talk about intellectual property rights, really just to give you a bit of an overview, because if you are going to start a company, sometimes people skip the step of understanding the importance of intellectual property rights. So quite briefly, we will explain what are intellectual property rights, why is your company structure important, and then what happens, what are some of the weird little anomalies that can happen if your technology is in space. Now, everybody is in a different jurisdiction here. I'm an Australian lawyer, so this isn't meant to be legal advice, it's just general information. Because intellectual property rights are what we call creatures of statute, they don't exist in the real world, they only exist if your country legislates. So the nature of them really depends on your own jurisdiction and how your own country has, what laws it's made. But they do tend to follow similar principles internationally, and there are international treaties. So generally, what are intellectual property rights? It is essentially, they are rights that protect your mental creations. So your intellectual property is your mental creations, And some of those mental creations, not all of them, but some of them are protected by the law, and you've got certain exclusive rights to do things with respect to those things. So, for example, one of the most well-known ones is copyright, which is the right to copy and use works in a fixed form. And what do we mean by works? Well, software, for example, is a work. It needs to have some sort of creative step, but that doesn't mean it has to be artistic. So software is protected by copyright, drawings, music, film, a whole lot of things are protected by copyright. Certainly in Australia, you don't need to register it. I think there is a registration system in the United States. But quite often when you're talking about a license to use software, what you're really talking about is a license to use the exclusive rights that are in copyright. Another kind of intellectual property right is trademarks, and that's a kind of a badge of origin. So this particular product comes from this particular company, and so you know Coca-Cola and well-known trademarks like that. If you're going to start using a name, you want to make sure that nobody else is going to, if you're successful down the track, register a trademark and start pretending that their product is your product. So that's another type. There are other important intellectual property rights depending on the nature of your business. We won't talk about registered designs too much, but just be aware that it exists. It's talking about visual design of objects, kind of industrial design. Plant variety rights. I don't know if any of you are plant breeders, but that's another type of intellectual property. This next one is quite relevant to anyone who's starting a business. Confidential information and trade secrets, and they're sort of two levels. So confidential information is essentially just your secrets. So it could be, your next CEO that you haven't announced yet, that's confidential information. But trade secrets are really the secret sauce for your business. So it might be your special algorithm, it might be the particular way, business process that you've put together, methods of doing things. And then you'll also be aware of registered patents. And so that involves exclusive rights to use inventions, but only if you've registered those inventions on the patent register. And it's usually 20 years, depending on the jurisdiction. But you've got to essentially disclose it to everybody else, so everyone can see it, but you have an exclusive right to use it at least in that jurisdiction for 20 years. So when you're talking about putting together an intellectual property strategy for your company, you're going to need to use a combination of some of these things. So if you put everything into a registered patent, unless you're very, very wealthy, you're probably not going to be able to register it in every jurisdiction in the world. So all those places you haven't registered, it's not protected. So I would always advise, look at registering, patenting a certain part of it, but keep some of it as a trade secret. But you don't want to just have trade secrets because of employees come and go. And if the employees have your secret sauce, they might go to your competitors and share the secret sauce with them. And even if it's not lawful, it's still, nothing you can do. So a combination of confidential information, trade secrets, registered patents, copyright, depending on the nature of your technology, is the way to go. And the reason why it's so important to get this stuff right, not, in 3 years' time when you've already developed all the technology, you've got to do it right from the beginning. Because if you develop all your technology and you haven't been getting this stuff right, guess what? You're uninvestable. So if you've already given away the secret sauce, given away the farm, not protected your main asset, which is your intellectual property, your mental creations, then who is going to want to invest in you? You've already given it all away. So it's worthwhile understanding and perhaps going to see an intellectual property lawyer very, very early to make sure, for example, that you get your company structure right. So once again, this is something that you do on day one, not on day 365. So there may be different structures that are right for you, but this is one structure that is used by a lot of new companies. So the idea is you have a holding company that holds the intellectual property, which I'll call IP, and you have an operational company which operates the business and gets a license to use the IP but doesn't use it. So the operational company will employ the staff, sign supply contracts, sign customer contracts, and it's the one that carries the operational risk. So if something goes horribly wrong and this company gets sued, the crown jewels are still sitting in the holding company and they're somewhat protected. And also down the track, if you want to bring in new investors, if you want to set up another operational company in a different jurisdiction, you've got a structure that can be a bit flexible in terms of restructuring, growing, bringing investors, moving to different countries. So the way that this works then is that once you've employed your staff here and signed maybe contracts with your contractors, everything they create, including you, the founder, needs to be assigned to the holding company. So you can only do that with a written assignment. So you need a lawyer to help you to do this, but you get all of the intellectual property. You've got to make sure it ends up in there and not just in your head if you're the founder. And then you've got to make sure that there is some document that sends it into the holding company. And you've got to make sure that any interns, employees, contractors, with employees it should be automatic, but certainly for interns, students who are helping, make sure you get a written assignment, because if they write some code that turns out to be key to your stuff, then you don't own it if you haven't had it assigned in here, unless they are an employee, and then you need to get it assigned up. So intellectual property goes up, licensing revenue goes up to protect the cash in here, and then the license of intellectual property goes down. Does anyone want to ask a little question about that so far? Not yet? Okay. Now I'm going to get onto the right screen so I can change slides. Okay, so lastly, and I'm not going to rabbit on for too long, what happens if your technology is actually in space? So I said that intellectual property is a creature of statute, which means that if you are sitting in Vietnam and writing code, Vietnamese law will apply. If you're sitting in Australia, Australian law will apply. But what if you're building a sensor and it's going into space, for example, and you're operating services in space? What happens? Because I don't know how many of you know about space law, but the jurisdiction of your country only goes up to the edge of space. So your country, say Vietnam, it has sovereignty and jurisdiction all the way up until the end of airspace. And then once outer space begins, then it is an area beyond the jurisdiction of your country. It is an internationally shared zone, and international treaties apply to that. Your next question in your mind is probably, yes, but where does airspace end and outer space begin? There is no internationally recognised definition of that. For geopolitical reasons, everybody wants to keep that a little bit fuzzy. So the main reason I'm raising this in the context of intellectual property is most countries in their intellectual property laws have not actually extended their Copyright Act, Patent Act, Trademark Act so that they work in space. The United States has done it with patents, so they've got a special law that extends their patent law in space. So if you are in space and you have some connection with the United States and you infringe a US patent and you're in space, then you could be potentially sued in the United States for that infringement. However, if you're Australian and you have an Australian registered patent and then over a particular super duper invention that's going onto a spacecraft and that goes into space, Australian patent law does not apply in space. The law has not caught up to Australian reality, and so it's a little bit of a gap. And the same applies with copyright and with trademarks in Australia. So just letting you know, it's a kind of a funny little quirk that although we're all busy creating an intellectual property on Earth, when it goes into space, in some respects, it may not always be protected depending on what country you're in. So I could rabbit on forever about what it is that gives jurisdiction to space object, but I don't think I will go into that because it might be better to stop there and ask if there are any questions. While you're thinking of your question, I will just mention one more legal issue that I come across probably every second day, and that is about contractual terms that apply to using spatial data or the whole process of either generating and selling spatial data or purchasing and using spatial data. The experience that I'm having or that many of our clients are having and that I'm trying to help them with is that many spatial data companies, apologies if anyone is from one of them, have very difficult customer terms that are not very user-friendly. And it's not very easy to, I'm probably telling you all stuff you already know, but it can be quite difficult to negotiate license rights of intellectual property in the spatial data itself. And so for some reason, the big spatial data companies, not the ones that are giving it away for free like NASA, but the old ones and even many of the new ones, their customer terms and their license terms of their intellectual property are so restrictive that it makes it almost impossible to use without tripping over some license restriction. Combine that with the fact that they often have pricing models that assume that you're buying hundreds of kilometres worth of data when in fact you might only want 1 kilometre worth of data, and yet you've got to pay the giant for the giant amount. And the total experience of customers who are using spatial data is not so great often. And I'm mentioning that because is a grand opportunity for people who are getting into that space to create new business models. If you understand what customers like you want to do with spatial data, there's an opportunity for those spatial data companies to do a better job of packaging of writing better more customer friendly contracts and having better, more customer friendly business propositions that are easier to use. One of our clients is called Lawler, and they have a platform where you can buy spatial data, and they've managed to get some deals through the suppliers of data that are a little bit better, which they pass on to their customers. So that's just one option if you're having trouble getting some of the stuff that's might have higher resolution than some of the free stuff. But perhaps I'll stop there. Any other questions? Any questions at all?
So it's Emma here, Donna, before other people pop in. Thank you so much for that overview. Like one of the barriers to turning a good idea into a viable concept is often, particularly for scientists, that fear of intellectual property rights and just how to go. And I know many scientists, they tend to think of the idea and do all the things before they even consider needing to set up one of those company establishments.
Yes. Yeah.
I guess particularly for this audience, we know that an additional barrier for international or regional collaboration can be understanding and navigating a different country's IP system. Are you aware of any good places that people can go to for more information? Like, I think perhaps even the World Property Organization might have some resources and tutorials.
Yeah, look, I'm sure there are. Look, to be honest, Dr. Google is probably a very good start. It's just what I often find is that a lot of the law firms have very good websites, and we are not one of them. We have a website which has nothing but little stars that you can move around with your mouse. So if you kind of need some relaxation, go onto our website. You can, but it has no information whatsoever. Many law firms do have very good, very good information. So if you want to know about the Australian intellectual property environment, there will be a law firm, there will be many law firms that have put something on their website, and it's usually very good and very succinct. And that's, to be honest, that's what I do. I would usually go, if I want information about, you know, UK intellectual property law, I would start with going to a law firm's website just to get an overview. And then if you want to go deeper, or if you want to, you can always do that. I hope that's helpful. But
that's really good advice, because I guess with the websites from the law firms, like I suppose they're looking for good business, so they would want to have useful information on their website to encourage new business, right?
Yeah,
it's a great tip.
Sometimes I wonder why they give so much away. Like, it feels like they're giving away the farm already up there, but talking about giving away the farm and intellectual property, but they give away a lot of intellectual property there. But it's very useful. One thing I should have mentioned about patents, just a tip, depending on the laws in your jurisdiction, you can rule out your ability to patent something if you use it commercially. So there are some exceptions which are fairly narrow about testing and so on. So if you were thinking that you might have an invention that you might want to one day patent, before you start using it for anything, get some advice about what you can and can't do, because you really could be crueling your chances of future revenue if you, for example, start using it or start sharing information on it that is not without non-disclosure agreements and things like that. So I can't emphasize enough that if you want to have a business using your intellectual property, get advice very early about what to do and what not to do, so you don't give it away and make it uninvestable right on day one, which would be super unfortunate. If there's nothing else, I'm happy to hand over the baton to my neighbour, Daniel.
No worries. Thank you very much, Donna. And if anyone has a question, do you mind if they are able to reach you via your email address?
Yes, sure. That would be fine.
Wonderful. So I will pop Donna's email address into the email that covers the summary of today. So if you do have a question about IP, or you come up with a question later on as you're developing your idea, please do feel free to reach out to Donna. She's very friendly. Thank you again, Donna. I'll welcome now from Austrade, Daniel O'Toole. Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks, Roshni, and thanks, Donna. So yes, my name is Dan O'Toole. I'm the manager for a sector team within the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, looking after defence and space, and I specifically manage a space team. So the Australian Trade Investment Commission, just to give you a bit of background, and I do have some slides here just to explain where we sit and what we do. We share. There we go. Is that all coming through clearly?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so the Trade Investment Commission, I do know we have an international audience, so it's just to explain what we do. We're the Australian government's lead agency for export promotion, investment attraction, and also education and the revitalisation of the visitor economy at the moment as well. We have quite a significant global presence. We have 10 offices across Australia that service Australian companies and exporters and promote our sectors domestically, but we also have quite a significant global network. So there's 68 offices in 48 markets and approximately 1,200 people. It sort of fluctuates a little bit across the organisation as a whole. As you can see, there's a smattering of different colours there as well. That includes landing pads, which I'll also touch on in a minute, that could be relevant to some people here when it comes to working out how to take your idea to the next level. But broadly speaking, what we do, it's pretty straightforward. If you've ever dealt with a trade promotion or investment attraction agency before, they're in most countries. We're here effectively to help connect businesses to each other. So we do a lot of introductions and help Australian companies find partners internationally. And similarly, we work with investors to help them understand the local ecosystem in particular sectors. We try to create opportunities, so we do try and use our knowledge of particular sectors and government relationships to generate opportunities for companies to meet each other, to understand where they might be able to expand their business and a range of other things. A good example recently was that Austrade partnered with a range of oops, I'll jump back a little bit. A range of different agencies, including the Australian Space Agency, the Department of Defence, CSIRO, and others on a major trade show at the Colorado Space Symposium, where we showcased a lot of Australian companies who are across the value chain of the space industry. We also had a kind of more mixed version of this last week at the Farnborough International Air Show as well, where we had a similarly large delegation. So that's one example of us trying to create opportunities and introduce companies to each other. We also reduce risk for companies. So if you're an international investor looking to come into Australia and don't know where to start, we help manage your journey into Australia by linking you or providing you with an understanding of the federal and state breakdown, for example. So we offer a free service to investors where if you're interested in coming into the country and you meet certain criteria, we will manage a case for you and give you the best information possible by communicating your opportunity to all the states and territories and asking them to put their best case forward to you. So we kind of tailor a process that makes your life a lot easier, where they'll explain what benefits there are to setting up in their state, what they have to offer from an industry standpoint, where their skills are, if there are any grants or other forms of assistance they can offer, then we'll send that back to you, and then we can sort of manage a process with you where you come into the market. Similarly for Australian exporters, because of our global footprint, we also provide you with a point of contact in a market who is connected with local government agencies, connected with local business. They can explain things to you like usually, at least some high-level points around doing business in that country. They'll have guides on how to do business, cultural issues that you need to address, etc. Sometimes, depending on the market, they will have some information on things like IP law. So Donna raised that before. On occasion, we'll have, depending on the complexity, we'll have at least some high-level guides on things, or if not, we will have a referral service network that we can forward you to that will be able to address those issues. And yeah, broadly, we also help guide you. We provide you with that high-level advice on what markets might be of interest to you by using that network. In terms of the cohort here and the kinds of things that we would talk to companies about, particularly when we're speaking to Australian companies who are maybe early stage and looking to understand what they should be doing to bring their ideas to the next level. Usually, we have a criteria for how we assess companies. There's often an export readiness element to it. It's not critical. We work with some very early stage companies. but we like to know how advanced your product is. And if particularly in the space sector where I'm focused, we find there's a really large number of spin-outs of universities and other early stage companies. So these questions are quite important to us. And often what we find is that there are a lot of people with really good ideas that they're kind of in search of a problem, if you will, at least to start with. So we see this evolution with a lot of companies where they have a great idea, and it might take them 2 or 3 iterations to really work out whose problem they're best suited to solve. So that's the kind of the first question we ask you, particularly for early stages, is who are you helping with this? I mean, what is the problem? Where is the gap? And who needs it? Is this market primarily domestically based? Is it international? We have a whole category of companies we call born globals because their market is fundamentally global. What is the nature of your customer? This is a really important thing for how you set up your company. Space, whilst it is increasingly populated by a large private sector interest, the customer is still heavily government based, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is if your customer is a foreign government, what does that mean for your company? And if that's your key target market, how do you set yourself up? Or if it's education, or if it's purely private sector, or if it's direct to consumer, these are all things that will affect how you develop your business. And then leading on from that, so what are the hurdles once you've identified where your solution best fits? How do you then build your company to address that? Go on one back. But your domestic track record is going to be important. What are your networks like domestically? How will you leverage that? What is the level of trust that you've got? Does your technology sit at a particularly low or an advanced TRL? If you've got export experience in other areas, that'll also come into play for working with international partners. How well do you understand the regulation you're coming into? I mean, we deal with companies where we discover that for certain technologies you need a treaty for collaboration to be possible. So you need to understand those things early. And then finally, the ownership models of your company. If you're dealing with a market that is heavily government-based, if you're looking to sell into governments, are they going to require local partnerships with specific ownership models? It's something we encounter quite a lot. So these are all things to consider. Austrade does work with companies to help promote them using a number of different mechanisms. One of them is something we have called the Export Market Development Grant. So this is focused around Australian companies. I won't spend too much time on this just because we can get into the weeds, but I can send links to this to Australian companies who aren't familiar with it already. But basically, it's a 3-tier program. It used to be a retrospective program that companies could apply for once they'd done something to promote their business internationally, and they could recoup costs. It's now forward-looking. You can apply. Now, you need to apply ahead of time when you're planning to promote your business abroad, and you can receive a grant that'll help you support that. And it is split broadly into these 3 categories. The other thing for early stage companies that could be of interest, particularly those from Australia here, is the Trade Investment Commission maintains a network of landing pads. So looking back at that map, those different colored dots I mentioned, we do have five landing pads that are focused on helping Australian scale-ups and startups understand how to do business in a global environment. One of the things that this program tends to do is it used to be quite a set and fixed program of 3 months cohorts of companies. It's become a little bit more tailored and open. So you can contact Austrade, and we'll follow up with me after this if you're looking for more information. But the idea of this program is to help you become more sharper in how you engage with potential partners and customers. And we find particularly with companies who have come out of universities or research programs, there's just a really big jump from having worked heavily on a very technical issue for a long time, and then being able to pitch that to a potential customer in a place like San Francisco, where the needs are just very different, and they'll want you to get to the point within 30 seconds, really, of what you're looking to do and how you can help them. So there's a training program that these landing pads provide that really helps sharpen you up with your messaging, to help you understand how you need to be pitching it, how you need to tailor your messaging to particular partners and clients, and make sure you get the most out of your international ambitions. That's probably the key points I'd like to cover just around that. We also, as the space sector team within Austrade, we do obviously track a fair bit around the market for various sectors within space. And within the Australian space economy as well, we do have a kind of broad set of statistics that we like to trumpet, that the sector is growing quite significantly since the launch of the Australian Space Agency in 2018. Some of the key facts that we've got are that the number of companies has been growing by about 5.7% a year. This is across all of space. But a lot of this is relevant to Earth observation. And there's about close to $1 billion have gone into private companies, and that's a mix of venture and government grants and other things like that. But there's also a significant testing and accreditation system, ecosystem that's being developed. So if you look at the Modern Manufacturing Initiative, grants worth approximately $300 million have been piled into developing different types of space manufacturing and development ecosystem facilities. A lot of that will be to help the Australian government, which is developing its own customer pipeline, its own pipeline of projects, have faith in the domestic industry to meet some of that demand. And that's kind of reflected in this $2 billion figure for civil space and 7 to 10 in defence space programs. But it's not just them. The key stat in the middle does show that Earth observation has a $280 million contribution to the economy, and there's downstream benefits that are significantly greater than that as well. So we're at a very different place now than we were 4 years ago, and we do have a growing number of companies, but there is still I think a gap in terms of how we can help companies commercialize faster and more effectively. I realize I'm probably heading towards time, but just more broadly on Earth observation itself. So the stat on the last page is $283 million for the broader economy, but the wider economic benefits were about $2.5 billion in 2020. The EO constellations are going to be a focus for the Australian government moving forward. There is a national mission for Earth observation that you all have all heard of, that's $1.2 billion in value, and there's also similar defence programs as well. The demand for Earth observation, which I know everyone's covered, is being driven by a number of areas, but it's multifaceted and affects all parts of the economy. Disaster management is particularly close to us here in Australia. It's one of the things that's driven the Earth observation mission that's being drafted now or developed now after the announcement earlier this year. With the bushfires in 2019, that was a key driver for that. But managing our incredibly large land mass in Australia, we need more and more of these tools. So that's something that we're quite cognizant of, but that's also of importance to groups like the Department of Defence, who need to understand what challenges that they face in an increasingly complex spatial environment. That's probably the key points I think we would have on the space sector. I did have a couple of other sort of high-level things on just the agency and things like that, but I might actually leave it there because I do know that there's a section here for questions as well.
That was great, Daniel. Thank you very much. So we'll open up now for any questions, comments, conversations around what either Donna or Danielle have raised. Please feel free to either unmute yourself or type your questions into the chat.
Thank you. I might ask a question. Thanks, Daniel. Brendan McAtee here, one of the Hackathon team. What advice have you got, and how can Austrade help So in this hackathon, we have a lot of, I would say, like early stage developers of ideas with Earth observation. Your representation in those different Southeast Asian regions, how can those kind of representatives start to help, you know, the folks in here if they'd like to develop things further?
Yes, so absolutely. If you're a company who's looking to engage with those markets, and we've had some examples of this recently, there's a Canberra-based company who was keen to engage with government agencies across Southeast Asia in the aviation space, actually, sort of using satellite technologies in aviation. So we were able to assist that company by providing them with introductions to each of those countries in Southeast Asia, their government, their relevant government agencies that look after air safety and air traffic management, and make connections with potential local partners. So if you're an Australian company that wants to do business overseas, our networks in Southeast Asia, and we've got offices in Manila, Taipei, Ho Chi Minh, Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Jakarta, Port Moresby, even so close to this region. You know, Hanoi, there's a strong presence all throughout Southeast Asia that we can leverage to help you. The Trade Commissioners there, they have local teams. They're usually not deeply sector specialized, but they have networks across government and industry that they can help you with, and leverage the Australian badge of government also to just give you a little bit more traction in the meetings you're seeking.
Are there any other questions for Donna or Daniel?
I might hog the floor again and ask another question if no one has any other burning ones. This is for Donna. Donna, you mentioned there was a bit of political hesitancy to define an actual height in the atmosphere, if you like, where space starts. Are you able to give us a little bit more of the insight onto why that is? I find that really interesting.
Yeah, well, everyone agrees that you have sovereignty over your airspace, but you don't have sovereignty over outer space. And so it's such a double-edged sword. So let's just say you're the United States. These things are all debated at the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space in Vienna. And every country, there's like 110 countries that are members of that committee, and everybody has a veto right. And every year when they meet, the legal subcommittee has an agenda item, which is, shall we delimit, you know, space? Shall we define where space begins? And there's always a bit of discussion. And every year they go, yeah, nah, we're not going to. And so, for example, say that you're the United States, you don't really want to be telling Russia and China, for example, we think our territory ends 80 kilometers up or 100 kilometers up. That's where we think that our territory ends, and then you can put devices up there to fly over our land without our permission at that level. At the same time, they don't necessarily want Russia or China to say, well, you can't come and see us, you can't come and send a device over our land any closer than 120 kilometers, for example. So you can see, if you make it too low, you're essentially losing a whole lot of territory, your sovereignty in your jurisdiction. If you make it too high, well, you're limiting yourself as to what you can do over somebody else's territory. And every country is thinking about that in that way, or many of them are. And so that's why it's geopolitical, military kind of thoughts are around that, you know, driving that kind of thing. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, thank you. So is it a bit like international waters on the ocean? Is it?
Yes, it is. So once you
model?
get, yeah, there's a lot of similarities. So once you get into outer space, there are 5 major space treaties that govern that area, and most but not all countries have signed one or all of them or some of them. And the main one is the Outer Space Treaty, which is like the Magna Carta of the whole space law area. And that says, you know, number one, there's no national sovereignty in space, and you can't go up to the moon and put your flag in the moon and say, okay, we own this bit and you don't own this bit. So you can't draw little borders around the moon and divide it up. And these were all agreed during the Cold War with a view to avoiding a war in space. So, you know, in 1967, height of the Cold War, everybody's got nukes pointed at each other, but they all agree, okay, we don't trust each other, but let's all agree that we're not going to have a war in space and nobody owns space. Okay, cool. Everyone at least agreed that.
Great, thank you.
Those are some really great questions, Brenton. I'm so glad you asked them. Emma.
Yeah, this time I have a question for Daniel, and it might be a bit of a long question, but actually it's part question, part comment. It was really exciting and pleasing to me to see that you have a value for Earth observation in your slide deck. Throughout the week, we've been talking about the importance of international collaboration to get the full benefit and value out of EO. And another publication that GA, CSIRO and a few others played a very influential role was talking about the value of Earth observation under a increased regional collaboration model. So the figure, I think, this is a Nous Group report, done in 2019, was that under a business as usual collaborative, not necessarily collaborative model, but under a business as usual model, the Asia Pacific region would get 1.35, I think, $1 billion returned to the regional economy, to the US, but that's mostly to the space superpowers. So that's really Japan, China, the US, possibly Australia, I think, is number 4 in that. But under a more collaborative model, where we share our knowledge, our expertise, our data, our infrastructure, including the Open Data Cube, there's a potential to leverage an extra couple of $1 billion US. So I think the more collaborative projection is 1.48 trillion US by 2030, which is actually why we're having this event this week, because we know that there's a lot of great things happening in Southeast Asia, and there's a lot of innovation happening in Australia as well. We've got this great technology that's open source. And we've got a community of users and folk that are really, like, they're coming from the problem rather than the technology perspective. So we're actually focusing on taking the problem and seeing if we can use technology to create a new product service for the region. That was a really long sort of ramble, I think. But I think maybe it would be worth, Daniel, of course, the upstream part of space is extremely important, but talking about some of the other different types of positions in Austrade, if you're happy to do so, because I understand you've got agricultural counsellors and folk, because a lot of the downstream applications can relate to agriculture and probably different sectors of Austrade, but it would be nice to sort of get a bit of an elaboration of what you have.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's it's a very astute observation that you know, the applications is really where the rubber hits the road with all space technologies. I think we have another slide where it's, I think, $370 billion as a global sector, US at the moment, and 95% of that is in downstream applications, which is significant. The different parts of Austrade, so we do have some crossover with this. It's particularly, so Basically, the way Austrade works is we have a trade pillar, an investment pillar, who provide most of the interaction with our clients, and then we have sector teams that cut across them. So I'm part of one of the sector teams that cuts across both of those divisions, but we work quite closely with the ag team as well, and the mining and resources team, because the space technology is quite critical in both of those. And as a it's quite interesting when it comes to satellite technologies and satellite-based solutions. We've seen the need for Earth observation data and other satellite platforms to provide solutions to disaster responses. And also, there's been interest in them for, addressing future pandemics, for example. And there's an interesting linkage there, because the pandemic caused a loss of seasonal workers in Australia. So we have companies that we're aware of through the ag team that use satellite platforms for tracking, remote assets and other things like that. So it's one of the big areas for emerging space companies in Australia. And a lot of them, one in particular we spoke with, I think it's FarmBot in New South Wales. They mentioned that for a long time they had they'd faced challenges getting buy-in from a lot of sort of older ag co-ops and different groups for using their technology, because they just had more faith in getting a couple of guys in a ute to go and visit a range of different sites. They just would prefer somebody had physical eyes on it, but they lost access to all of those people, and their businesses. So the business for a group like FarmBot actually increased during the pandemic, because they needed to be a bit more creative and open-minded, and so they started exploring space data solutions. So we work quite closely with those different divisions, because interestingly, the pandemic created a whole other set of problems we didn't really think about, and that's how you replace, how do you replace people fundamentally when there are none to do, the simple things, to be honest. So there's been strong linkages there. Mining has been dealing with this problem for a long time. So the mining sector in Australia actually are the foundational members of a group called AROSE, the Australian Remote Operations in Space and Earth. So they work with the University of Western Australia, I think Curtin and others, Woodside Petroleum, Rio Tinto, a whole group of organisations that look to use space technologies that they look to spin into space mature mining technologies that they use for remote asset management, which they've been doing for a long time, because they have autonomous vehicles, they have command and control centres that sit in Perth and manage sites in the Pilbara, and their view is that they could use the same technologies in space. So you kind of have it from both ends when it comes to the primary sectors. You have space improving productivity for an area like agriculture, and then on the other side of things, mature mining technologies potentially advancing areas in space.
Absolutely. And I know for us in the downstream, like you can separate the downstream further into maybe those that are the data analytics companies, and those who are very closely connected to geospatial world, but then also there are the more end users, which may not even realize they're using geospatial technology. They're just using it naturally, which ag, mining, insurance, and I think Frontier's done some great work to look at, those sectors in Australia. And it's a chance for Brendan if he wants to say a few words as well on that. But yes, also Daniel, back over to you.
No, that's probably Mel. Let Brendan speak.
Yeah, well, I think thanks for that, Emma, and thanks Daniel again for all your answers and things like that. And I think the industry sectors in Australia, I think you touched on a couple of key points, which is really that building that trust in these kind of solutions is one key part. I think that's particularly key for the agricultural sector, and that need to use things, and that trust comes back to, prefer to have two guys in a ute go out and check things out rather than a satellite telling me something, because I know the two guys in the ute and I know, I trust what they tell me. So it's, for that sector, it's particularly important, that idea of building that kind of trust and confidence in those kind of data from Earth observation. If we move to mining, mining and mining equipment, technology services, that kind of industry. You know, it's really about the key driver there is really reducing uncertainty, you know, as quickly as possible, and that feeds into then return on investment, managing risk and efficient operations. So I think there's a number of different drivers of different industries, and what's important about that is when we're talking about developing new products for Earth observation products for different types of industry, we need to think about how we pitch those to those different industries and make sure we capture these ideas of value that are really important to those industries. So trust in agriculture, reducing uncertainty in mining. If you look at finance and insurance, it's probably about you know, making sure there's return on investment, you know, if you're investing in these kind of technologies and these kind of things. And then if we went into the urban environment and local government and planning, you know, this is all fantastic evidence either for making decisions or showing how well decisions have worked. So I think that those ideas of really pitching the value of Earth observation that really meets the key drivers of industries is really important as well. That's certainly further from the Australian perspective. I don't have a good feel for equivalent drivers of value in obviously Southeast Asia. But if anyone has got any comments on you know, what value looks like from Earth observation in these different sectors, and you know, as we're talking about climate, very interested to talk more about that and really interested in anybody's thoughts.
So we'll open the floor up now if anybody would like to chat about anything here. Any final questions for Donna, Daniel?
I might just throw in there, just in response to Brendan, we have a client, one of our clients is LatConnect 60, based in Western Australia and Malaysia, and I know that they are seeing a lot of opportunity in Malaysia in particular, in terms of providing their insights from their Earth observation satellites, particularly to the agriculture area there. But I'll stop there, but just as an example.
Yeah, I'll just throw in. I like the LatConnect 60 guys. When I worked in the co-working space, Core Innovation Hub in Perth, they're just next door. I like really those guys.
You know them well.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So we might at this point wrap up this really cool, inspiring keynote session. I have learned so much as well, and there's been a lot of really useful nuggets of information that have flowed quite freely. Thank you very much to both of our speakers, Donna and Daniel. We appreciate your time and your wisdom so much, as to our audience. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. What I'd now like to do is, just before we have a 5-minute break, I will quickly run through what we are going to do for the final presentations for the closing ceremony tomorrow. So you can see up on my screen, and I know that I'm the only thing standing between you and the bathroom, so I won't take very long. I'd like to emphasize that you don't need to complete the entire presentation slide deck. We're really happy for you to complete what you're able to. We completely understand a week is not very much time. This is a work in progress, so please complete what you can. If you can think of a catchy title or even just a descriptive title, you can put that in here. And in your group name here, it's okay if it's just yourself. We wholeheartedly encourage, if you're based in Australia, we wholeheartedly encourage you to network and see if there are people in Southeast Asia that you'd like to work with, or if you're in Southeast Asia, if there is someone from Australia that you'd like to work with. However, we do understand that, as I mentioned before, a week isn't very much time. So you know, and part of phase 2 of this program is us having the opportunity to be able to look at your idea, respecting your IP, and try to find opportunities to network you and connect you so you can collaborate with others. So don't worry too much if it's just your name here. A little bit about who you are. So just a short sentence and a photo of yourself is enough here. And then here, again, you don't need to necessarily complete all of the slides. If all you can do is really complete what you think the problem is that you would like to see some action on, you can say here, I really care about landslides that result from clearing of forests. Or you can say, I really care about flooding because it's impacted my local community. Whatever it happens to be, we're just looking for one sentence here. It does not need to be fleshed out to the nth degree. If you'd like to go further and you're able to, this slide talks a little bit about what the problem is. So you might be interested in using satellites to understand coral reefs, but you may not know what the right technology is to do that. So you could say here, I'm not sure what remote sensing information can access underneath the water. Or you can say, I'm not sure what the right resolution of remote sensing imagery will actually be useful here. Just something to show that you've thought a little bit about how Earth observation science can be used to address the problem that you're interested in. We don't need you to say what the solution is necessarily. And then here, this section, the gap in the market, this links back to what Daniel just mentioned, as well as what some of the two AsiaLink business sessions over the past 2 days have gone into as well. So here, if you have an idea, and it's okay if you don't, you can leave this section blank. If you have an idea, you can start to talk about who is impacted. So for example, if you're interested in the impacts of land clearing on landslides, you might say there are some communities whose water quality suffers as a result. That's just one example. It can be anything. And again, we're just looking for one sentence. It doesn't need to be too much. Finally, you can go into some of your solutioning if you can, if you're able to. In here, we ask you to think about, if possible, how what you are thinking actually solves the problem that you put forward on the earlier slides. What sorts of technology or science might be useful, and how you'll reach your target market. So this slide digs deeper into how you'll actually, and again, respecting IP, you don't need to, oh, I've just realized my camera's frozen. Respecting IP, you don't need to go into your trade secrets. We really want to make clear that your IP is your IP, and we will respect your IP. We don't want to take your IP or put you in a position where your IP could be stolen. Finally, and this is one slide we're all very interested in, what have been some of the biggest learnings for you this week? It might just be, I met some new people. That's enough. Ideally, 3 dot points or 3 words would be enough here. And I hope that this overview has made it easier for you to think about this final slide deck. So thank you again for joining this keynote session, and a huge thank you again to our 2 keynote speakers, Daniel and Donna. We'll now take a 5-minute break, and we'll see you back here at 20 past. It's actually a 3-minute break, really. So we'll see you back here in 3 minutes, and we will then continue our question and answer session.